What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Tricky Jim at Full Grip Games. I just got back from the Richmond Virginia Regional Championships where I was able to finish 10th place with a Rogue Rowlett and Alolan Exeggutor Tag Team GX deck featuring Vileplume. It's a really cool deck. It was a ton of fun to play. Me and my friends played the deck, and between the four of us that played the list, we all did really well together as a team, with JW Creewall winning the entire event, Michael Zealy finishing in the top 8, myself bubbling out a top 8 cut at 10th place, and Brady Botner finishing in the top 32 of the Richmond Virginia Regional Championships. It was really cool to watch the deck come into fruition the weeks leading up to the event. We were inspired to play the list by my friend Matt Price, who had been playing the deck at locals. He actually invented the deck by himself in his bedroom, and it was just like, theory crafting the idea for the deck, brought it to a league challenge, did really well, beat me at the league challenge when I was playing Archies in this expanded challenge, and it was really cool to watch the deck evolve over the week. So I'm going to talk about how we were able to cook up this Rogue deck and why it was so good for the Richmond Virginia Regional Championships in this video. Matt had a surprising number of things spot on with his original list, which I'm showing off here, that he brought to the challenge. He really was high on the idea of using Steven's Resolve to pick cards out of the deck and really craft your strategy going forward with the picks off of Steven's Resolve. He used Lieutenant Surge, thinking that we'd be going behind in prizes quickly and wanted to play multiple supporters per turn. Very few items. We see there's actually no items in Matt's original list. And I really like the idea of using the Steven from Roaring Skies as well. He said that in his original list he had trouble being able to chain energy, and Steven really helped him to not only find Steven's Resolve to be able to get the pieces out of his deck that he needed to move forward, but the Steven also helped him chain those grass energy, which can be pretty difficult to find. Some unique cards that Matt ended up having in his original list that didn't end up making the cut for our regional list were Ace Trainer, Gladian, and Acerola, as well as Lieutenant Surge and Karen. So a lot of these things were good cards and had specific purposes. The Gladian was to be able to pick out Vileplumes from the prizes that maybe you would have needed for the game. If you prize both of your Burning Shadows, Vileplume with the ability that prevents the basic Pokemon, that is the defending Pokemon, from attacking, then you might want to go in and pick one of those out of the deck. I think Ace Trainer really cool for limiting your opponent's hand size if you're behind on prizes, which is something that happens pretty often with this deck. Coach Trainer just helps you draw through the deck and find new resources, and Lieutenant Surge can allow you to pull off cool plays where maybe you Faba multiple times in a turn, or you Lieutenant Surge, Steven, find an energy, and then Steven for a Faba, and Faba an energy as well. So some really cool plays you can pull off with Lieutenant Surge strategy. And I think the concept behind Matt's original list was really strong. When I got my hands on the list, I started toying around with some new ideas. I didn't think that we needed two Gladian. I felt like Gladian was a really slow card, so I cut one of the Gladians immediately, and I wasn't super sold on the idea of Steven's Resolve yet. So I started trying out cards like Misty's Favor to search other supporters out of the deck, and I like the idea of being able to use Lieutenant Surge strategy and then use Misty's Favor, grab some supporters from the deck, and then play those supporters all in the same turn. And one of the first things that I did to the list, I tried out the Misty's Favors. I thought they were okay, but my biggest issue with Misty's Favor is that I couldn't grab the grass energy like Steven's Resolve could. So that was an immediate issue that I did find with the deck. But I also added in Pokégears, and I found that every match where I opened Pokégears, I was really excited to get to hand select off of the top 7 cards of the deck any supporter that I would want to craft my strategy forward. So the Pokégears I was immediately sold on. Those were golden, and I wanted to start trying to figure out how to fit a 4th Pokégear into the deck. But the Misty's Favor I quickly fell off of. Those were not performing up to up to my expectations. So those had to go. One of the first decks that I started testing the list out against was Zoroark Control. And the reasons we had to test against Zoroark Control is because in an open meta, Zoroark Control is going to be a deck that we felt like almost all of the top tier players were going to gravitate towards because there were so many unknown factors about this new expanded meta. We had 3 new untested sets in expanded format: Unbroken Bonds, Unified Minds, Hidden Fates. It was going to be an absolute open field for deck creativity, and in an open field, a lot of times Zoroark Control can definitely capitalize. We had some decks that we knew players were going to be excited about: the new Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX, the new Turbo Dark decks, Archie's Blastoise, and it just seemed like with all these Turbo decks, it's going to be a field day for Control. The Rowlett and Alolan Exeggutor deck has a great time against a lot of the basic base decks because of the Burning Shadows Vileplume, able to stop those basic Pokemon from attacking. So a lot of those were just free matchups. I mean, Turbo Dark was a pretty good matchup, being able to get the Burning Shadows Vileplume out and just tank with that. Not being able to be damaged by basic Pokemon was really stellar. And Night March, pretty good. Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX, he just set up both Vileplumes, get the Burning Shadows Vileplume in the active, and Faba your opponent's Stealthy Hood away. And the rest of the match was gravy. So we didn't really have to do a lot of testing against these basic decks because the strategies were pretty simple. Get out the lock and your opponent pretty much just folds. So we had a lot of time on our hands to be able to just play with the Zoroark Control matchup. So JW Creewall ended up coming to my apartment for a weekend, and I had this deck, and I was like, all right, JW, I think this deck's broken. We broke down the matchups, and it looked like it had an insane win rate versus most of the expected metagame, except for big question marks next to the Zoroark matchups. How are these Zoroark matchups going to go? So I tried playing the Misty's Favor version versus Zoroark Control, and we were getting beat pretty bad. The only way we were able to stay with the deck is we were able to get a Power Plant to stick early and get Zoroark Control in maybe a compromising situation. But the thing is that the deck just wasn't fast enough. I wasn't seeing enough resources with the deck. I wasn't drawing into energy quick enough with the deck in order to punish a slow start with Zoroark Control. So there were a couple things I decided we needed to do. We needed to put Steven's Resolve back in the deck. I needed to do that. Wanted to get a 4th Pokégear into the deck to increase early consistency. We also decided that we needed more mobility cards. The Acerolas were not cutting it in the Zoroark Control matchup because Zoroark Control was never going to put any damage on your board. So the Acerolas were basically dead in that matchup, and we wanted more mobility since a lot of times Zoroark Control is going to try and bring up your item lock Vileplume and just stall it in the active position. So we decided we wanted to go from a 2-2 split of Acerola and AZ to a just 4 of AZ, so we always had that mobility. I also started with 2 Lysander, thinking that I would probably never want to Guzma, but then we immediately switched over to 2 Guzma instead, so that our catcher outs could also be switch outs. So now we have 6 switch cards in the deck with 2 Guzma and 4 AZ. That felt much better against Zoroark Control. And then the 4 Steven's Resolve and the 4 Faba were really good in that matchup as well. The 4 Faba helping to keep the DCEs off Zoroark. If they tried to put any pressure on you, you could eliminate those double colorless energy and limit them to just maybe a few water energy. Something we weren't expecting is for Zoroark Control decks to play a lot more water energy than just a couple. I mean, Jimmy Pendarvis's and Michael Pramawatt's Zoroark Control list that we ended up facing played 4 water energy, was something we were not anticipating having to go up against. You can see in this next iteration of the list, I actually started trying out the 1-1 Pidgeotto line. This is actually a 1-2 Pidgeotto line. You might see that I have a Japanese Dodrio in the deck, a 1-2 Japanese Dodrio line. That's because I didn't actually own Pidgeottos yet. So when I first started testing out the Pidgeotto, we had JW Creewall over, and I told him, listen, the Pidgeotto is going to turn this match out. And the reason why is because in our first night of testing, where I was losing to Zoroark Control, JW was playing Zoroark Control, I was playing the Egg deck, it's because the Egg deck didn't have enough cards. And you need to play responsively against Zoroark Control. You need to just have a hand advantage, which was something that I found that the Rowlett and Alolan Exeggutor deck was not able to get a hand advantage against Zoroark Control, because they would just eventually get a stadium to stick and then trade and get a big hand, and you couldn't really limit their hand size. So we thought about maybe trying to throw a Judge into the deck or something like that. I tried Judge. Judge was horrible because Zoroark actually drew out a Judge better than our deck did. And that's when the idea for the Pidgeotto arose. I was like, if we could just set up a Pidgeotto line, then we would be able to consistently draw through our deck and be able to play against Zoroark Control responsively. And when I say responsively, it's like you need to counter everything that a Zoroark deck does. If a Zoroark deck plays down a special energy, you need to Faba it. If they play down a stadium, you need to Power Plant it immediately. If they start attacking you, you need to AZ. And then you also need to find your energy as quickly as possible, because the way to beat Zoroark Control is to take all 6 of your prizes, and you need to take all 6 of your prizes before Zoroark Control gets to the bottom of their deck, because the whole goal with a Zoroark Control deck is to get to the bottom of their deck, where the bottom of their deck is just gravy. They've been resource managing all of their good supporters back into the deck, and you need to stop them from ever getting there, which means that you need to attack quickly and efficiently, and you have to have hand advantage to be able to do that. So the 1-1 Pidgeotto line really helped us to do that. It started as a 1-2 Pidgeotto line, and the reason it's a 1-2 Pidgeotto line is because you don't necessarily want to start Pidgey. You want to start Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor as often as you can, but you also don't want to prize either of the pieces. The Pidgey is also much easier to search out than the Pidgeotto, since we don't actually have any item search in the deck other than the Pokégears. And the Pidgeotto is often searched out with Steven's Resolve. So you just use Brigette or Fan Club to get your Pidgey, and then you'll use Steven's Resolve to go get the Pidgeotto. And then once you set the Pidgeotto up, the whole deck just draws amazingly. It allows for some really cool plays where maybe you Brock's Grit and then continue drawing into your energy with the Pidgeotto after you Brock's Grit, which was really cool as well. It just helped you to have that hand advantage, see your whole deck, and eventually get to the bottom of your deck, which was really cool because you just saw more resources and you were able to play more responsibly to what your opponent was doing. So I was immediately sold on the Pidgeotto once we put the Pidgeotto into the deck. I was immediately sold on the Pokégears as well. The 4AZ was fantastic. Something else that we ended up doing was changing the coach trainers to Professor Junipers. The coach trainers weren't really doing anything. We did find that sometimes you just wanted to just get rid of your hand and see a whole new hand. So the 2 Professor Junipers were good. You could just Steven's Resolve for them if you had maybe run your entire hand out of resources, and then Professor Juniper the next turn to see a whole bunch of new cards. Leading up to the event, we had decided that we had solved the Zoroark Control matchup. We had solved pretty much all the matchups that we intended to encounter, and we thought, okay, if we play against like a Turbo Zoroark deck, just try to Power Plant them and Faba their energy and hope for the best. Zoroark matchup, a straight attacking Zoroark deck was going to be stressful to play against no matter what, but we felt like the Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor deck had enough positive matchups at this point, and we felt positive enough against Zoroark Control that we could safely go into the event and say that we're going to have a pretty decent time against that deck. Now, the night before the event, in the car ride, we got me, Michael Zealy, and Brady and Natalie all in the car together, and we're just brainstorming different things to add into the deck. Is there any other changes that we want to make? And I thought about the Let Loose Marshadow. Let Loose Marshadow came to me, and I was like, this is a card that we need to play in the deck. We had originally talked about wanting Judge. We needed some way to disrupt the opponent's hand. Matt Price originally had the great idea of including those Ace Trainers, which was really cool. You could use the Ace Trainers to limit your opponent's hand size, but we didn't have the Ace Trainers in the deck anymore. You can see we also took the Lieutenant Surges out of the deck. Matt Price was really high on the Lieutenant Surges early, but then we eventually were able to talk to him and decided that if you actually get the lockup quickly, you a lot of times stay ahead on prizes. So the Lieutenant Surges ended up being dead cards that we just removed from the deck for more consistency. And then also the Gladians were more like a safety net that we didn't really feel like we needed. And if you prize something crucial, or if you had too many prizes, just scoop, go to the next game. And this deck could win matches quickly enough to not have to rely on the Gladians. So we were safe cutting those cards. But we did want some form of hand disruption. The Let Loose Marshadow came to me. It only has a 1 retreat cost, so it fit the bill that everything else in the deck needed to fit as far as having a 1 retreat cost. This was something really important to us because when working through the Zoro control matchup, we thought about Bunnelby. Bunnelby can throw resources back into the deck, but it's got a true retreat cost, so we couldn't really rely on Bunnelby. Or Resource Management, Oranguru, another cool card that we could have included, but it's got a 2 of retreat cost. And everything in the deck needs to have a 1 of retreat cost so that you can get into your Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor on the first turn of the game and use that super growth attack to evolve up your Vileplumes and either lock down items or lock down your opponent's basic Pokemon from attacking. The Pidgey's got a 1 retreat cost as well. So everybody in the deck had to have a 1 of retreat cost in order to make the cut. Let Loose Marshadow, who is going to be banned in expanded format soon, made the cut for its Let Loose ability, which was really cool. We saw in the finals of the regionals, JW actually ended up using Let Loose to limit his opponent to just 4 cards and play Power Plant. And this was something you were able to do pretty consistently with Fan Club. You could Fan Club for an Oddish and your Let Loose Marshadow if you started with your Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor, and you could Power Plant, you could let loose your opponent to 4 cards and get a turn 1 item lock, all on the first turn of the game if you were going second, which is incredibly powerful. That is a substantial lock. The Let Loose allowed that to happen. And another cool interaction with the Let Loose Marshadow, which we decided was just game-changing, was that it wasn't just a one-of, right? You played a one-of Let Loose Marshadow, but it wasn't just a one-off ability. With AZ, you had the power to limit your opponent to just 4 cards 5 times. You could use Let Loose Marshadow once, and you could theoretically AZ up the Marshadow and use it again 4 more times, giving you a potential 5 outs to limit your opponent to a 4-card hand size, which was absolutely amazing. And with the Pidgeotto in the deck, you actually weren't hindered too much by your own Let Loose, because you could let loose yourself to 4, and if you have Pidgeotto in play, the Pidgeotto allowed you to see up to 6 cards after you let loose. You let loose yourself to 4, and then Airmail get to see the next 2 cards, meaning that you had a pretty decent time drawing out of your own Let Loose as well. The latest addition to the deck, the actual midnight inclusion, was the Computer Search, which is wild because A-Specs are some of the best item cards in all of expanded format. Almost every single expanded deck needs to play an A-Spec, but I was not testing with an A-Spec leading up to the event. JW texted me. Brady Botner, who was in our car, was like, hey, I think we should just we should throw in an A-Spec. And I was like, you know what? The more we were testing opening hands, and I was like, I don't really like seeing Professor Juniper in my opening hand. And we played 2 Professor Juniper, and we decided that Professor Juniper wasn't that good, that we didn't need 2 Professor Juniper. So we all agreed that we'd cut the second Juniper for the Computer Search. And we saw that in the finals, JW actually opened his Computer Search and allowed him to win Game 3 by searching out the Power Plant to go with the Let Loose turn 1 and limit his opponent to a small hand. So the Computer Search, very valuable. It helped piece together those turn 1 item locks, those turn 1 Burning Shadows Vileplumes, which is so essential to this deck working. Now, this was the list that Brady, Michael Zealy, and I all played. We all finished in day 2, with Michael Zealy finishing in the top 8, myself at 10th, Brady at top 32. JW took it upon himself to change 2 more cards without telling any of us, because that's just the most JW thing that he could possibly do. But that's okay. JW made some pretty cool changes to the deck himself leading up to registration. He ended up throwing in a Shuckle instead of the second Steven, which honestly is a pretty superficial change. The difference between 1 Steven and 2 Stevens, not that huge. So the Shuckle-GX was a really neat card that he tossed into the list and allowed him to have a 1 energy attacker, which was something that I did feel like the list was probably missing. So even though you turn off your own protective shell ability with Power Plant, Triple Poison and Wrap GX, both very accessible attacks, and Shuckle-GX does fit the bill as a 1 energy retreater. So the Shuckle-GX, Very cool. Triple Poison could allow you to take out threats on your opponent's side of the field with just 1 energy. And Wrap GX, actually a usable GX attack. And we did use Tropical Hour GX sometimes to finish off games. You know, you Guzma up a Tapu Lele and finish it off with Tropical Hour GX. But Wrap GX, much more useful, I think, in the long term. So I do agree with JW's inclusion of the Shuckle-GX, and I think it was a really cool card to see. JW also played 1 different Gloom instead of the 4th Gloom, but he did admit that that was a mistake and that the Irresistible Aroma Gloom is the best Gloom to play. So he said he would have opted for all 4 Irresistible Aroma Glooms. And that's the list that we ended up taking to the Richmond, Virginia Regional Championships. It was really cool to see the deck evolve over time and take form. I think that the deck was an incredible meta call for the event with so many basic Pokemon in the metagame, just seeing a ton of play. And a lot of times you just sit across from your opponent, you set up the Burning Shadows Vileplume with the Disgusting Pollen ability, and they would just scoop up their cards because they didn't have an answer to it, especially under item lock. If you set up both Vileplumes, the item lock Vileplume and the Burning Shadows Vileplume, it was just too much for your opponent to deal with. And it created a lot of free wins, which was really cool. But I think that this was probably a one-off deck. I mean, I think even though this deck performed very well at the Richmond, Virginia Regional Championships, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to do in the tournaments going forward because the deck can be teched against very heavily. Turbo Dark, if they play a Stealthy Hood or a Target Whistle, can beat this deck, even though Turbo Dark is entirely made up of basic Pokemon. They can easily knock out 1 Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor Tag Team GX, and then if they Target Whistle it back up and knock it out again, that is game over, all 6 prizes taken. If they play a Stealthy Hood, they can stop the Disgusting Pollen ability from working on them, and that would be a really great tech. Now, for decks that are not as aggressive, the Stealthy Hood is not as much of a problem because you set up the item lock Vileplume and you can keep the Stealthy Hoods from coming into play by Fabaing them away, which is a really good strategy. And that's how we got rid of the Hoods in the Mewtwo decks. But in decks like Turbo Dark that can easily deal 300 damage, the Stealthy Hoods are a lot more intimidating to play against. So if Stealthy Hoods make their way into decks for the Portland Regional Championships, this deck is going to have a bad time with that. Now, there was another group that played Rowlett and Alolan Exeggutor, and they did pretty well with the deck as well, with Ian Robb finishing the top 8 of the event. They played Sceptile-GX, which is a cool, efficient attacker for the archetype. Mach Cut does 60 for 1 and discards a special energy, so kind of fulfilling a similar role as Faba, just getting rid of DCEs on Zoroarks, and also just getting rid of special energy in general. Leaf Cyclone was a very efficient attack for 2 grass energy, deals 130 damage. You get to move a grass energy from this Pokemon to your bench Pokemon, and Jungle Heal, pretty cool as well. And I like that it only has a 1 retreat, 230 hit points. A nice alternative attacker if you are looking to jam in another Stage 2 line. Sceptile-GX is a pretty cool addition. Another thing that I'm really looking forward to in this deck is the new Vileplume GX. You could play in the list, and you don't have to put any more basics or stage 1s in. Vileplume GX can just evolve from the Oddishes and the Glooms that you already have in the deck, and its ability, Fragrant Flower Garden, allows you to heal 30 damage from each of your Pokemon every turn, which is really valuable and can just win you matchups, especially the grindier matchups where maybe your Pokemon are taking residual damage turn after turn. Fragrant Flower Garden can be very good. It also has a very efficient attack. Massive Bloom does 180 for just 2 energy. It does 10 less damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon, but that is a very efficient attack and I think a very strong option. And then there's Allergic Explosion GX for 1 grass energy, 50 damage. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned, paralyzed, and poisoned. Talk about accessible GX attacks. That is certainly one, and I think a awesome option for the deck going forward. So even though the deck will get teched against, will assuredly get teched against at the Portland Regional Championships, I think the concept of the deck is just so strong that it will rear its head again at some point, especially with that new Vileplume GX in the mix. So thank you all so much for watching the video. That's it for our Rogue Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor Vileplume deck. Hopefully that shed some insight into Our thought process, building the deck. Big shout out to Matt Price, JW Creewall, Natalie Champay, Michael Zealy, and Brady Botner, all for helping to formulate the deck, do some testing. I tested a ton with Brady and JW leading up to the event with this list. Big props to JW again for winning the event with the deck. Big props to Full Grip Games. Thank you guys so much for everything Full Grip Games does as far as helping to support the content. Thank you guys all for supporting the content as well with the views, the follows, the subs. It all means a ton. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Make sure to like the video, sub to the channel, ring that bell, and check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/TrickyJim, where I stream 5 days a week, every single weekday. Make sure to check out the Twitch channel and see the schedule so you could catch a live stream. Take it easy. Peace.